All right, we're on to problem number 6. I've drawn the diagram in back of me here. And let me just explain a little bit about this. We have the price of pollution on the vertical axis. We have the quantity of pollution on the horizontal axis, right? So in other words, we really have to decide how much pollution as a society we want to, quote, accept. And so there's a demand curve for pollution, believe it or not. In other words, a demand curve for the right to pollute. That may sound terrible, and environmentalists may freak out initially, but they've kind of come to understand this, that you can't eliminate pollution completely. That's just ridiculous. So there's some price to pollution abatement, and we have to find that price, or we can do it another way, and we'll talk about that. So in this particular case, this is like finding the price of pollution. You would do that via a tax. You'd say for every unit of pollution you produce, you have to pay this much money, all right? And firms would have a demand curve for pollution because they need to pollute because they produce things, right? And at some level, when they would only demand so much pollution because once it became, the price was greater than the value of pollution to them, they would stop eliminating pollution. I mean, they would stop producing pollution at that particular point. So this would be the equilibrium price, and this is how much pollution we'd end up, let's say, in the air. Alternatively, the government can say, I'm going to fix the supply curve. I'm going to basically say you're allowed to produce this much pollution. How could you do that? You could do that with cap and trade. In other words, the government could say, here, I'm going to give you 10 million tons of pollution permits. You can distribute them among yourselves. We'll have an auction for them. The market will figure out who gets the permits, who needs the permits the most, who's going to bid most for the permits. But I'm going to cap pollution. If you don't have a permit, you cannot pollute. That'll be the rule, all right? Here, if you're willing to pay, you can pollute. Here, you can't pollute. I'm going to fix supply. So one fixes the supply curve. The other tries to fix the price and let the markets solve this equilibrium quantity here. All right? So that's the basic two systems we have. Europeans are probably more into, well, they use cap and trade, but they also use pollution. They tax the output from firms. But again, well, the questions will illustrate what the issues are here. It says, which graphs illustrates a pollution permit program? Well, I've kind of given that away, but I want to actually see why, all right? This is not a pollution permit program. This is a pollution permit program because I fix supply. By having a pollution permit program, what you're doing, you're saying here, we will accept this much pollution. These permits give you the right to pollute. Sounds crazy, right? But no, it's a very effective way of rationing a scarce resource, which is the ability to pollute, and forcing firms to basically only pollute up to this point. That's all they can do. Now, the permits go out into the world, right? And what happens is, I've got an old plant, and for me to get rid of a unit of pollution is going to cost a fortune. You've got this new efficient plant, and for you to get rid of a bit of pollution is pretty easy. But you got a permit. We all got permits, okay? So then we're going to bid. So you're going to sell me. I'm going to go and ask you if I can buy your permit. Because if I offer you $100 for that permit, and you can get rid of your pollution for $50, you will sell me that permit for $100, get rid of the pollution yourself, which costs you $50, and you'll make $50. And in fact, when you take the profit minus your cost, it costs you nothing to get rid of that pollution. That's a good solution because the low-cost polluters are the ones who eliminate first. Me, I have an older plant. It cost me $200, let's say, to get rid of a unit of pollution. I just bought a permit for $100. I just saved myself $100 by buying it from somebody else. So the cap and trade system works by fixing the amount of permits and letting firms bid between each other for those particular permits. And if I don't have a permit, I can't pollute, so I have to get rid of it myself. Alternatively, on this over here, all right, well, let me see. Well, on this over here, the government sets a price for pollution and says you have to pay this price for every unit of pollution that you create. All right? So for some firms, they'll get over here, their output of pollution says, well, you know what? We're producing so much pollution that the price we have to pay is more than the value of our output that generates this pollution. So you know what? We're going to basically cut back to here because that's where our demand for pollution, basically our willingness to pay for pollution, is going to be exactly equal to the price the government's going to charge us for pollution. And that would achieve the equilibrium that way. So here's the issue. And if you read the Krugman article that we assigned in class, there are two basic issues here. In this particular case, the uncertainty is we don't really know what Q we're going to end up with. The government sets a price, and they don't know if they're going to get to QA exactly. The uncertainty here is we don't know the price. The government sets the number of permits that are out in the market, but we don't know where the final price is going to end up. It could end up extremely high and causing firms great distress because it's very expensive to buy those limited permits. So they're both systems. This would be a tax system, this would be a permit system, have their uncertainties and their potential drawbacks. But both try to achieve a fixed level of acceptable pollution by making people pay for the pollution they're going to basically put into society. All right, number 7 with that little lecture. Which of the following is not necessary in order for the corrective tax and pollution permits to have equivalent effects? So if in order for these to have equivalent effects, in other words, in order for the amount of pollution in the environment to be the same and the price relatively to come out the same, what has to hold? It says PB must be equivalent to the corrective tax. So price B must be equivalent to the corrective tax. That's correct. If this price that ends up for the permits is the amount I would tax firms, then we'd end up in the same place. So number A is correct. It says B, QA must be equivalent to the amount of pollution allowed to the pollution permit holders. In other words, QA right here must be the same amount of permits I would give. This is the market determining how much pollution ends up in society. This is the government determining via how many permits they're going to basically put in society. The two systems will achieve the same thing if this market result is the same as the number of the permits the government allowed basically to be distributed to firms. So B is correct. C, the equilibrium price and quantity of pollution must be the same in both markets. Well, it's true again. In order for these two approaches to achieve the same result, in other words, the same level of pollution produced at the same price, it has to be the case that these equilibriums are both equal. All right? So C is correct too. D, the amount of pollution emitted by each firm must be the same. No, that's not the case, right? Because the market's basically going to sort firms out, so allowing firms that are basically low-cost polluters to basically get rid of their pollution first and either sell their permit or avoid paying this tax, all right? And so the point is that you have firms that are going to have different levels of pollution, which is going to be very efficient because you're going to allow the efficient, low-cost polluters to basically get rid of pollution first, and the more expensive ones for whom it's costly to get rid of will get rid of it later. So is that a good solution in the end? I think so. And one of the advantages of this is that the government has the right to do this. Let's say we didn't get this price right. Well, the next year, the government raises the price of pollution from PA0 to PA1. Or let's say the government in a cap and trade system put out too much permits and we found out that the price was really low for these permits. Well, the government could just ratchet back down. Say, okay, this year we're going to have fewer permits out there. All right? So it allows the government to basically calibrate and figure out what's an optimal either price or what's a more optimal level of permits. But either way, the government's involved in forcing firms to deal with the cost of their pollution via either permits or a tax in that market. All right, that does number 7.